My mother called me the night before my sister's engagement party to let me know I was not on the guest list. "This weekend is about her journey," she said, her voice warm and deliberate the way it always gets when she has already decided something and just needs you to hear it. "You have a way of making things about yourself, and we don't want that energy in the room." I didn't argue. I just said okay and hung up the phone. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already written the check for the venue deposit, $4,200, transferred 3 weeks earlier from my personal account to my sister's Interac, because she had texted me crying that the place was going to give away the reservation if she didn't secure it by Friday. I had sent the money within the hour. I didn't even ask for a receipt. Have you ever been the person who pays for the party, but doesn't get a seat at the table? Not metaphorically. Literally. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is there. I want to know who's part of this community, and if you've ever been treated like a bank account by the people who are supposed to love you the most, hit like and stay with me. Because this one is for you. My name is Meredith and I'm 31 years old. I work as a licensed insolvency trustee in Vancouver, which means I spend my days helping people and businesses restructure debt, navigate bankruptcy protection, and figure out what they actually owe versus what they can realistically walk away from. I am, in the most literal sense, someone who is professionally trained to assess when a financial relationship has stopped being viable, and when the only honest thing left to do is close the file. I should have applied that skill to my own family years ago. I didn't. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not what they did, but how long I let it go on. My parents live in Kelowna. My sister lives in a condo in Burnaby that my parents co-signed for because her credit score was not where it needed to be at the time. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Kitsilano that I pay for entirely myself, which I mention not to be impressive, but because it will matter later. I have been working since I was 15. I waitressed through my undergraduate degree at UBC, tutored during my CPA coursework, and graduated with no student debt because I structured a repayment plan the semester before I started, so that I would never owe more than I could clear in 18 months, miss. My parents did not help me with tuition. I did not ask them to. What I did not realize at 22 was that declining their financial help would not earn me their respect. It would just make me the one they came to when they needed money instead. It started small, the way these things always do. A few $100s here, when my father's truck needed repairs. A grocery run I'd pay for on my visa when I visited for Thanksgiving, and my mother quietly mentioned they were a little tight that month. I never made it a big deal. They were my parents. You help your parents, but somewhere around year 3 of my career, the asks started scaling with my salary. When I got my first real raise, my mother called to congratulate me, and within 6 minutes had mentioned that my sister's car insurance had gone up, and it would really mean a lot if I could help cover it. Just this once. I covered it. Then it was my sister's gym membership because she was really trying to focus on her mental health. Then it was my father's fishing equipment because he works so hard and doesn't ask for much. Then it was a flight for my parents to come to Vancouver for a long weekend. Economy class. And I paid for the Airbnb because my apartment only had the 1-bedroom. When I sat down and actually added it up 2 years ago, the number was just under $67 over 7 years. Not in any one dramatic gesture, in 112 separate transactions, most of them under $1,000, each one individually reasonable. Sounding enough that I could never quite bring myself to say no. My sister, for her part, never asked me directly. She had a system. She would call our mother would call me, and the request would arrive pre-packaged in a layer of family obligation, so thick that refusing felt like the aggressive act rather than the ask itself. My sister would find out I had helped and would send me a voice note saying something like, "You're literally the best. I don't know what we'd do without you." And then, I wouldn't hear from her for 6 weeks unless she needed something again. The engagement party was the moment I finally saw the full picture clearly. My brother-in-law-to-be, I'll call him my sister's fiancé, is a general contractor who runs his own company out of Abbotsford. He drives a very nice truck. He takes my sister on very nice vacations. He has the social media presence of someone who wants you to believe his life is expensive and deliberate, and mostly it works. What I knew, because I am good at my job and because I was curious enough to look, was that his company had filed for creditor protection under the BIA 18 months earlier. Not publicly announced, not something he'd mentioned to my family. Just a quiet restructuring that anyone with access to the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy database could find in about 4 minutes. I found it in 3. I hadn't said anything yet because I didn't know how. My sister was so happy. My mother was so excited. My father had already started telling people at his curling club that his youngest daughter was marrying a businessman. I kept thinking there would be a right moment. A calm dinner where I could sit down with my sister and say, "Look, I just want you to go in with clear eyes. There is some financial history here. You should probably understand before you sign anything." There was never a right moment. Because every time I was in a room with my family, I was either being managed or being used. And I couldn't always tell which one was happening until it was already over. The call from my mother the night before the engagement party was a Thursday. I was at my desk reviewing a creditor proposal when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I wish I had trusted that instinct, she explained, with the tone of someone delivering a perfectly reasonable administrative update, that the party had grown into a larger event than expected, and the venue had a strict head count, and it just made more sense logistically if I sat this one out. My sister had agreed. It would be more relaxed for everyone. I had a tendency to ask questions at family events that made people feel interrogated, and this wasn't the time for that. I asked if she was aware that I had transferred $200 for the venue deposit. She said yes. That was very generous of me and the family appreciated it. Then she said goodnight and hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't call back. I just opened a new spreadsheet. I know, but it's how my brain works. And started itemizing. Not to be petty, to be honest. Because I had been telling myself for years that my family loved me and was just going through a hard time. And I needed to look at the actual data and stop letting the story I wanted to be true overwrite the story that was plainly in front of me. By the time I was finished, the number was $67,400. That was the amount I had given, or transferred or charged on my credit card, on their behalf since I started working full-time. There was no repayment schedule. There had never been a conversation about what any of it was. It was not a loan by any legal definition, because it had never been documented as one. In the language of my profession, it was an unsecured, undocumented transfer of funds with no formal expectation of return. The word for that, technically, is a gift. But a gift is something you give freely, without condition, because you want to. What I had given was something else. I had given money because every time I didn't, I was made to feel like a bad daughter. There is a concept in insolvency work called a preference payment. It's when a debtor, knowing they're in financial trouble, pays one creditor more than others right before things collapse. Courts can set those payments aside. They can claw them back. The reasoning is simple. The money shouldn't have moved if the person giving it didn't have a full picture of the situation. I had never had a full picture. I had been making preference payments to my family for 7 years based on incomplete information and emotional pressure. And now I had not been invited to the party I had funded. I didn't go to sleep that night. I made a list. The first thing I did on Friday morning was call my bank and request that the $4,200 e-transfer be reversed, on the basis that the stated purpose of the funds, a venue deposit for an event I was told I would be attending, had materially changed. My bank told me that e-transfers cannot be reversed once accepted. I thanked them and hung up. Then I called the venue directly. The venue coordinator was a woman named... Actually, I'm not going to give her name because she was just doing her job, and she was perfectly professional throughout. I explained that I was the person who had made the deposit payment, and I asked to confirm the name on the reservation. She confirmed it was my sister's name. I asked whether the deposit was refundable, under the venue's standard cancellation policy, if the booking was canceled more than 72 hours in advance of the event. She said yes, that the venue's policy allowed for a full refund on deposits canceled more than 48 hours out, and the event was still 19 hours away at that point, so, technically yes. I thanked her. I asked whether she could cancel the booking if requested by the person who paid the deposit, given that my name was on the payment record. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she said that their standard practice was to honor cancellation requests from the primary payee when the reservation holder had not signed a separate service agreement. My sister had not signed anything. The booking had been made over the phone, and the deposit had come from my account. I canceled the booking. Then I sat back in my office chair and waited. My mother called at 11:14 a.m. I watched the phone light up and I let it go to voicemail. My sister called at 11:22. Then my mother again. Then a number I didn't recognize, which I suspected was my future brother-in-law calling from his work phone, because he was smart enough to know I might not pick up for him. I let them all go. My sister left a voicemail that I will not repeat in full, but the gist of it was that I was unhinged, that I had humiliated the family, that this was exactly the kind of thing she was talking about when she said I made everything about myself, and that she hoped I was proud. I was, actually. Not in a mean way, in a very quiet, clean way, like the feeling you get when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and you finally put it down. I still hadn't addressed the bigger issue, the thing I had been sitting on for 3 months, the creditor protection filing. I poured myself a coffee and opened my laptop. What I had not yet told my family was that my investigation into my future brother-in-law's financial background had gone considerably deeper than a single BIA database search. I had been thorough. It's what I do. And what I had found over the course of several weeks of quiet, careful research was not just a restructured business with a cleaned-up balance sheet. It was a pattern. 3 separate trade contractors had filed construction lien claims against his company in the past 2 years. 2 had settled out of court for amounts I could estimate, based on the lien values. 1 was still active and had gone to BC Supreme Court, where the proceedings were a matter of public record. His company had received a $280,000 draw on a residential development project in Langley. The subcontractors on that job had been paid approximately 40 cents on the dollar before the company restructured. The developer was pursuing recovery on the remainder. There was more. I had found a numbered company registered in his name in Alberta, with a residential address that did not match anything connected to him in BC. The company had received 2 government procurement contracts through the Alberta Infrastructure Program in the previous fiscal year, totaling just over $190,000. That company had filed its last annual return 13 months ago and had not filed since, which meant it was likely going to be struck from the registry for non-compliance. That money, $190,000 from public contracts, had moved somewhere. I did not know where. I was not a forensic accountant, and I was not in a position to subpoena records, but I knew enough to know that the picture was not clean. My sister was about to marry this man. My parents had co-signed for her condo. If she married him and his liabilities followed them into the household, my parents' credit exposure could become real and material. My mother had mentioned in passing, about 6 months ago, that my father was thinking about refinancing the house in Kelowna to access some equity for retirement. If his credit history became entangled with a household carrying my future brother-in-law's debt, that refinancing would get complicated fast. I put together a document, not a formal report. I was careful about that, because preparing a formal solvency opinion on someone I had a personal conflict of interest with would have been professionally inappropriate. But a factual summary, public record only, every source cited, the BIA filing with the case number, the lien registrations with the BC Lien Registry reference numbers, the court file number for the active Supreme Court proceeding, the Alberta Company registration with the government database link, no interpretation, no editorializing, just documents and numbers, and the places where a person could go to verify everything themselves. I emailed it to my sister at 2:30 in the afternoon. I emailed a copy to my parents. I wrote a short note at the top of each one. It said, "I'm sending this because I love you, and because I believe you deserve to make decisions based on complete information. Everything in this document is publicly available. I have not drawn any conclusions. I'm just making sure you have what I have. What you do with it is entirely up to you." Then I turned off my phone. The silence that followed was, I will not pretend otherwise uncomfortable. There's a difference between knowing you've done the right thing and feeling good about it. I sat in my apartment that evening and watched the sun go down over English Bay, and I felt something that was not quite sadness, and not quite relief. It was more like the sensation of finally reading the last page of a book you'd been dreading finishing. So our story was over. You couldn't unread it. I did not hear from my family for 11 days. When my mother finally called, her voice was different. Not softer exactly, more careful. She said that my sister had shown the document to a lawyer, a real estate lawyer she knew through a friend, and that the lawyer had confirmed the lien filings were accurate, and that the active court proceeding was concerning. My sister had confronted my brother-in-law-to-be. He had initially said I was fabricating things, that I was jealous, that this was exactly the kind of sabotage he had always expected from me. Then, my sister had pulled up the BC Lien Registry on her phone and shown him the entries, while he was sitting across the table from her. The engagement was on pause. My mother said this quietly. She didn't say thank you. She didn't apologize for the Thursday night phone call. But, she said it, and I think that was the closest she knew how to come. My father called the next day. He is a man of very few words, and most of them are about weather or hockey. So when he said, "I think we owe you better than we've given you," I understood that this was, for him, an enormous thing to say. I told him I appreciated it. We talked for 4 minutes, and then he said he had to go, because the Canucks game was starting, and I said, "Okay, Dad," and that was that. Here is what I want to tell you, and I want to say it plainly because I've been thinking about how to say it for a while now. I didn't cancel that venue booking to hurt my sister. I didn't compile that document to blow up an engagement. I did those things because I had spent 7 years prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own honesty, and the result was that I was sitting alone in my apartment the night before a party I had paid for, uninvited, watching my phone light up with requests, and never with anything that looked like care. There is something they teach you early in insolvency work, and it sounds cold when you say it out loud, but it is genuinely one of the most compassionate ideas I have ever encountered professionally. It is this: the most harmful thing you can do for someone who is in financial trouble is to keep absorbing their losses without making the underlying problem visible. When you protect someone from consequences, you are not helping them. You are just delaying the reckoning and making it worse when it finally comes. I had been absorbing my family's losses for 7 years. The $67,000 was not the damage. The damage was what that $67,000 had allowed them to not confront. My sister's fiancé's financial history. My parents' pattern of looking to me to solve problems they didn't want to see. The way the family had organized itself around my willingness to give and their willingness to take, until taking felt like their right and giving felt like my only value. When I stopped absorbing, the problem became visible. That's not sabotage. That's just what happens when the ledger finally tells the truth. I have not given my family money since that weekend. I have also not stopped loving them. Which I know sounds like a contradiction, but isn't. You can love people and decline to fund a version of their life that is built on a foundation you know will not hold. My sister called me 3 weeks after the engagement pause. She cried. She said she didn't know. I believe her, actually. She is not a bad person. She was choosing comfort over clarity for years, and I understand that because I was doing the same thing, just in the opposite direction. We talked for a long time. We are not all the way back, but we are talking. My future brother-in-law. He may still become my brother-in-law. I honestly don't know. Reached out once, through my sister, to say that the lien situation had been misrepresented, and he was in the process of resolving it. I did not respond. I noted it. The engagement party venue, for what it's worth, sent the deposit back to my account within 5 business days. The $4,200 sits in my savings account right now. I have not decided what to do with it. Part of me thinks I should take myself on a very good trip somewhere. Part of me thinks I should just let it sit there as a reminder that my time and my money and my presence at a table are not things that can be taken for granted. I lean toward the trip. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 22. Or at 25. Or honestly at 29 when I should have figured this out. Being generous is not the same as being indispensable. Being useful is not the same as being loved. And the moment you confuse your value to people, with your financial value to people, you have handed them a map to everything that can be taken from you. You are allowed to withdraw that map. You are allowed to stop funding a story in which you are the resource and never the person. You are allowed to take your name off the account. The night I canceled that venue booking, I went for a walk along the seawall. It was late October and the air had that particular Vancouver bite to it. Cold and damp and smelling faintly of the ocean. I walked for a long time without thinking about anything in particular. Not about my family, not about the money, not about what would happen next. I just walked. And for the first time in years, I was not calculating anything. If any part of this story sounds like your story, I want to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me where you are. Tell me what you're carrying. You don't have to have it all figured out to deserve to put it down. And if this reached someone who needed it today, please share it. You never know whose feet it might land on at exactly the right moment.